So I guess I was on a 5-year exit strategy or a 6-7-year exit strategy. They all had successful careers. They were all married with children, looking at likely in a spot where their spouses really weren't considering full-time farming, and realizing that they had opportunities, and really they came to me and said, you know, would I consider this? Is this something we should be considering to ensure that the farm would remain in the family for the 5th generation and on into the future? And so I guess what we have is a unique situation in that nobody is really designated as a full-time farmer, but they're willing to work collaboratively to move the farm forward. And so I realize that's unique. It's not the same, but garages do it and other businesses do it. So why can't we do it in farming? And so that's part of the rationale we brought to the table to say this is unique, it's different, but how do we move it forward with ownership, and they may have someone else that is the primary day-to-day labor component. This is the family at a cottage this past summer. So, and there's been one addition. John had a son in early what? December?
No, late November.
Late November. Sorry, I was at a meeting, chairing a meeting in Ottawa when I got the news on my BlackBerry, and so I was thrown off my game for a short period of time. Succession planning, communication is key. I was thinking at one time that the 3 keys to a successful succession plan is like real estate: communication, communication, communication. Well, it is the ability to communicate, to resolve differences, to learn how to look at and respect one another, and I'll go through some of that as we move forward. I think the development of soft skills. Blair had mentioned that in his talk this morning. I think those of us that have had the opportunity and working in various situations off the farm and working at the board level understand the importance of soft skills and working with others. And I think that's a big key and part of advanced education in today's is group work. And if you do a job interview, that's often one of the questions. Describe something that you achieved as a group and some difficulty you faced, et cetera. That's kind of one of the standard pieces that's part of it. So I think part of this is soft skills. And I think likely as a family, learning how you develop those over time. And that sports picture likely was one of the things that being the only son, and my dad was the only son, my dad said to me when I wanted to play sports his reply was, I can't afford letting you spend time going to hockey or going to baseball or whatever. You got to be at home working on the farm. And I said, if I have one son and he wants to get involved in sports, I'm going to give him that opportunity. Well, wouldn't you know it, I had 4 sons and no daughters. They came later and we had use of the bathroom in the meantime. But that's a side issue. Basically, the sports, I think each that I can remember the years, we had 4 sons on 4 different hockey teams. We seemed to be going in a lot of different directions. Unfortunately, we had understanding neighbors who assisted us that had kids on the team. But it gave us windshield time together. And it gave us the opportunity of talking. I think as well when the oldest son was in grade 9 and on the high school football team, he said, Dad, are you coming to my game today? And it never dawned on me that I would be going to a high school football game, but he invited me and I thought, well, why not? And one of the ladies who was a neighbor, my dad was deceased at the time, she said, what would your dad think about you being at a football game instead of working back at the farm? And I said, well, I hope he would say, good for you. It's something I didn't do. So I think there's opportunities that we have. They only pass us by once, but if you're, depending on whatever age you are, is to develop communication skills and develop and understand what the interests of your children are. And I'm not saying that it's going to result in them being farming one day. What it will do is allow you to understand what really is are passions of your kids and or your children, and then trying to provide an environment where they can be successful and develop those passions. Now, Blair, I hate to use you as an example, but I will. It was, I think, first year around here, Blair, we came and talked about you registering for OAC, and Blair said, I don't know if I want to farm. And my reply was, and I think the registrar at the time said, well, Blair, give us 1 year in OAC and see if you can always switch to another course. And my outcome, my goal was always, you've got an agriculture background that opens a number of doors for you growing up on a farm. You may not, certainly farming, there's lots of options for careers. It'll open the door, maybe get you that interview, and if you interview properly, the job, from there on, it's up to you. And so after Blair was more interested in playing rugby here at Guelph, and after he got here, he was so involved when he was year executive that he didn't want to play rugby any longer. So it was an interesting transition to watch from a distance, and he can throw an apple at me if he feels I'm misrepresenting this. But it was also interesting to see brothers play each other on the rugby pitch, when having one mechanical engineer at Waterloo and somebody at Guelph. John went to Laurier, and Scott went here to Guelph as well. So it was interesting. I always had to cheer for Guelph, and their mother had to cheer for the other school. So opinions of everyone are important, and you have to understand everyone involved. Father's opinion doesn't trump others. The oldest doesn't trump the youngest. Each has different skill sets. Recognize those skill sets. No different than those of you that have had board experience or whatever, that everybody gets their say around the table. If they haven't said something, try to draw them out and get their information on the table and try to sort it out. I think that's the piece is one of the things we've looked at. Respect is very important. I was a dairy cattle specialist after I graduated from my master's here for a number of years before going back to the farm. One of the worst things I saw going into farms was two generations that didn't respect one another. And part and parcel of the challenge was there hadn't been a time that they had been separate, that the one had just continued right after high school and continued to work at the dairy farm. They never saw, the older generation never saw the younger generation as anything but the child that had grown up there and made some mistakes growing up, like we all did. And the younger one had never been exposed to different ways of doing things, and maybe Dad's ideas weren't all that wrong based on experiencing ideas and working under someone else. So I think what you have to do is kick them out of the nest and expose them to different opportunities, and then it will enrich this whole discussion, and I think it will develop respect over time. Whoop. And I think the goals of mom, dad, children, and spouses all have to be worked through. I think likely we're at the stage of talking with the boys. At this stage, communicating the boys contributing or communicating to the men, communicating to their wives is the stage we're at. We haven't brought them into the meeting stage quite yet, but realize that there has to be very good communication. If you want to chip in everything.
I was just going to add, I think something from my perspective that really helped us as a family is having regular meetings as families, so between my dad and my brothers. So having a time that we can have a focused discussion, on the farm, some of the goals, things that we need to discuss. Just keeping that open face-to-face communication is very important. Another tool that I'm sure a lot of people use as well is BlackBerry Messenger. So we have a group between my brothers and my dad. So just to keep update on things that are happening on the operation. A lot of it tends to be our schedules. Somebody's gone for a meeting this day. Who's going to cover chores? Dad's gone in Banff for a week. Who's going to cover feeding cattle? So
1,000 pigs to ship.
Yeah, 1,000 pigs to ship. I think just key to have those communication. And then I think for each of my brothers and I is having that communication with our spouses, like my dad said, making sure, I've kind of taken it as my responsibility that I'm the, voice for her in those discussions. And then the voice back to her to make sure she understands, because a lot of our, well, actually not a lot of, all of our wives have come from a non-farming background too. So it's a bit of an education on that side.
Okay, one of the assessments we did, and I'll talk a little bit later about a SWOT analysis, but I love feeding cattle. I mean, if I had my druthers, I would continue feeding cattle till the day I die. But I also have to realize that I'm working in a facility that is, this case, we've dug out the floor. My dad did that facility that was basically set up the way it was in the mid-'70s. I'm basically farming out an asset that eventually will sit empty. So that's a piece that I'm looking at. I realize this is a beef symposium, but it is also a part of this assessment of what, and so there's two basic feeders. One is where we tend to start the cattle, but the piece I wanted to point out here is low ceilings. The ventilation is less than ideal. And we have the ability to at most work with 3 groups. Ideally, it's only 2 groups of cattle. They're tagged so that we can identify them separately. And we do closeouts, but it's first in, first out over a number of cattle. And so it doesn't give us, so with the silos and the larger closeouts, we don't get accurate figures on efficiency, how much feed per pound gain, and I think it puts us in a position where we're not really understanding what's going on to the level that we can. So in our deliberations, part of what we were looking at were we rent about 700 acres, own only 200 acres. Well, no, our total operation is about 750, and we do some other custom work. But basically, some of the land we rent came up for sale. We're sitting in the urban shadow of the city of Kitchener. We did cash flows, couldn't cash flow farms that were in excess of $1 million. And then I think, I don't know who first raised the possibility. What about a livestock facility that could be managed by the boys part-time, by the men? Oh, sorry, it's no disrespect to them, but it's just habit for too many years. But basically, something that could be managed outside of their careers. Their careers are to a degree flexible, allowing them to alter hours, in most cases working, I guess, other than Garth, who has to manage 14 engineers in an engineering firm in Kitchener. So the other 3 tend to take the bulk of the non-scheduled work. And we do have retired 2 part-time individuals that assist in cropping, and they're pretty well full-time, so that I can go to my 3 days of meetings a week around the country. So this just again shows the new barn. This goes the back lane, equipment storage and hay storage. And I won't go into the specifics there, a current year. Some bin storages that we have, another shot from a silo, a heated shop, and I think you got to decide, what's your vision of the future? What are you hoping to achieve? So that's something that has to be in discussion. What in your mind would constitute success? In our view, and some of the discussions we had was, that we basically, the farm would stay in the family for at least one more generation, that we would have an opportunity of teaching that the grandchildren would have an opportunity of working on the farm and learning the value of work, and maybe leveraging some knowledge of agriculture potentially into a job as well, depending where their passion is. Doesn't mean they have to, but if that's something that develops, so be it. We did the SWOT analysis. I think most of you understand what a SWOT analysis is. And I think part of that is a realistic view of your current business, including assets. And so we looked at our assets. What are our tired assets? We looked at if one of the sons decided to take over the operation, what is he really buying? A lot of rental leases that could change after a year. Where would the cash flow come to provide the living expenses for Nancy and I, or to repay the debt that he had incurred and provide money for his siblings? So I think those are some of the things that drove us to the decision where we landed, and it may be totally different in where you're at, but that's some of the thinking that we went through. And then I guess as well, and Blair touched this at the other one, analyze what is the skill sets of your group. In our case, the boys bring unique skill sets to the table. I'll admit my weakness in terms of is financial analysis. I do accounting because I have to, not because it turns my crank at night. These guys can do spreadsheets and all those fancy things, and to me, it's just, I know how to use them, but it isn't where I'd rather spend my time. Usually asking questions and talking at board meetings is where I'd rather be, meeting people and learning new things. But anyhow, I think that's part of it. Is we had to have a solid business plan, and Garth could bring that to the table. Blair, because we are investigating hogs, Blair has the contacts across the province. He knew operations that worked. He knew contractual arrangements that would make sense. And as the ground shifts in livestock production, would have a clear picture of what's going to come down the road and adjust to it. And so I thought that allowed confidence in this area because of where that information, and it's really about people and relationships. And so he knew the relationships that we could enter that made some sense, and the others that we would stay away from. And then John has always had a real knack for equipment. And he was the guy that always got tapped on the shoulder to run the combine or run a piece of equipment because it intuitively came to him. And Scott has, and certainly cropping and herbicides has a skill set there. And then Scott, because of his agronomy and his advanced training in weed science, has been the one that's kind of designated for the detailed crop planning. So I think that's the skill set that sits around the table. Drove us to the idea that beef, because of its risk and the money involved, that eventually that money will be used to pay off some debt, generate some equity that mom and dad can potentially live on, and that the cash flow from the hog barn will pay for itself over a 14 to 16 year period, and it'll have a nice cash flow for, in most days, an hour of work in the morning and a 15-minute to 20-minute check at night. Now, granted, when you have to ship hogs or tattoo hogs, it's different, but that in our mind made some sense, and they were prepared to risk their inheritance on that approach.
Well, I think I would add too is making sure everyone has mutual goals. So, I think that's unique for us is all my brothers and I had a unique goal, and I think probably the passion that we all carry is wanting to keep this farm running and making it a profitable business that will keep going. And I think from all my brothers and my standpoint, that was the shared goal. Because if we did not all have that shared goal, our setup wouldn't be successful. Because, I think for myself personally, that's what gets you excited about, getting up early in the morning before work to do pig chores or tattoo pigs or ship a load of pigs at 6 in the morning. It's to keep this family business running and the heritage and the importance that carries to myself.
I think one of the benefits I know Nancy and I have talked about, we've seen them more often at our breakfast table since we've had the pig barn, because after they do the chores, I usually feed the cattle, they look after the pigs, and then they'll shower up in the pig barn, come in, grab a breakfast, and go on the regular day. And so that's allowed us to interface far more frequently with them and see them around. Just a few cropping scenes. I won't take that. Scott took some of these when we were filling the drying bin last fall. This is something, if we expand our cropping, this is what the boys used to call a high maintenance girlfriend. It means you're always burning belts or fixing something, and it's certainly going to be a different drying machine or drying system than that.
Yeah, I think anyone who's ran a stirrator can attest to that quite quickly.
Okay, I think there's a few things. When my dad had to take over the farm in 1932, his dad died suddenly. He had a will, but it was not signed and notarized. And so he had to leave grade 10 and come back to the farm. So an up-to-date will is a must. And we've gone through that process, Nancy and I as well, and trying to keep it up to date. And so because he didn't have an up-to-date will, in 1932, they had to pay fees to the provincial government as supervisors till Dad was 21. I think $500 a year on a property that he paid $5,500 for when he reached age 21. So don't pay the price for having a will, not having an up-to-date will. Dad and I entered an income sharing agreement. I was a dairy cattle specialist. I can remember Brian Pogue when he had less hair and I had more hair, but we won't go there. And basically, I had run in my travels with the ministry and income sharing agreements. I can think of some examples in Durham region, and a couple of the business specialists that were promoting it as an alternative. And so Dad phoned up and said he needed a replacement of a hip replacement, so it would be his third operation. And as the only son, if you're not interested in farming, let me know because I'm going to sell the farm. So decision time came. Communications and soft skills was not my dad's forte, but we came. So he said, I'm not prepared to sell you the farm now. And I said, well, I'm not chasing the real estate value, coming home to the farm, giving up a job and a career and chasing real estate values. I've seen that too often in my travels where siblings get their nose out of joint because, a son has contributed to the increased value of the farm. But and he's assumed one thing, nothing's in writing. I said, I've got to have something in writing before I'm going to quit a career. And so we worked through this. We spent a lot of money with lawyers and accountants, but I would advise it, and we're going to head there. We're not there as a family in our case. but I was given credit for time that that I had spent and working around the farm, and so it was all worked back to monetized, and I will just work through this. Income sharing is basically my dad left his money in the operation. We agreed to work for 4 years, and any increases were split 50-50. And I did a little bit of consulting off the farm during that period, so my living expenses, Nancy and I, living expenses were covered by my consulting income, and basically we had minimal expenses. And over that period, we extended it to 6 years, and after the 6 years, I rolled out with the hog inventory and 80 cattle. We had increased about 160 cattle during that period, and so I had 80 head of cattle and 700 or 650 hogs. And Dad made the decision. Well, during that period, then I leased the farm from him for I guess it was till 1990, and and I'll go to the next slide here, is that I had received an option to purchase. We had established the transfer price, and I had an option to purchase, and when he wanted me to purchase the farm, or allowed me to purchase the farm, I could exercise that option, and that was at 1990. So the transfer price was established. It was, in my case, 50 cents on the dollar of the appraised value in 1980, and I knew what I was going to pay. My 3 sisters knew what I was going to pay. They knew what they were going to get as an inheritance, and everything was transparent. So that was the way we worked it through. His basic comment was, I don't know if your marriage is going to fail. Again, he was very blunt. I don't know if your marriage is going to fail, and he had examples in the neighborhood where that had happened. And he said, the other piece is, I don't want you to cash in on your mother and my goodwill. So what I committed to was, if I ever sold the farm while they were alive, they would get the difference between what I had to pay and what the fair market value was when I left the government. I remember when I exercised my option in 1990, the lawyer said, are you going to leave that clause in? Because either he sells it to you or he doesn't. He's got to decide. So I said, well, you might take it out, but I know I've made that as a verbal commitment, and my word is my bond. So I talked to somebody in the last, John, you and I were at the same meeting in Linwood, and the comment there was they had, in a succession plan, they had a 5-year agreement, and they transferred land, in this case a section of land at a certain price, and they diminished that repayment back to the parents by 20% per year till after 5 years there was no obligation. So you can be creative in what you want to do, but I think that's some of the options. I talked about that. Transfer of non-real estate assets at agreed upon date. The transfer pricing should reflect the depreciated capital cost of those assets. What do I mean by that? Well, my dad liked to buy new equipment, and so he didn't have to pay tax. He bought new equipment while I was custom feeding cattle for him and other things, and he likely created bad habits for me. But then when it came to transfer those assets, he said, well, let's establish fair market value of those, and that's what I'll sell them to you. And the accountant said, well, why would you do that? He said, all it will mean is that the difference between fair market value and what your depreciated asset is called recapture, and it's going to pass through your hands onto the government. Is there any sense in making Stuart pay for money that the government is going to receive? So I got a break there, courtesy of the accountant, and my dad saw the wisdom of the suggestion. So I think you have to look at this, and our whole mantra was pay for what your parents are going to receive dollar for dollar, and try to avoid paying for things that are just going to flow through their hands to the on as tax. So I think I said that. So in the case that we're working with the 4 boys, I think there's a concept of equal treatment. So I think that's a piece that we've looked at. Adapt, I think in most cases you can adapt proven. We're looking at trying to adapt non-farm succession plans to our farm. How do businesses transfer, as we've talked about earlier, that are non-farm examples rather than anointing one person as the successor. So I think we're trying to get information and glean information from outside. Define an exit strategy. So if one of the 4 sons decides they're no longer interested, what does an exit strategy look like? And make sure we haven't defined that. But how many years before his brothers would have to pay him out so that it doesn't cripple the operation and the ability to move forward? And I think we got to talk that one over and figure what it is. The thing I've got in my head is 10 years, but I don't know if that's right. So I think we have to think that one through. And I think at the end of the day, if we haven't achieved the fact that we can all sit down for Thanksgiving or Christmas, or in a lot of cases the monthly family meal, then we failed. So I think that's, I'm not going to go through, I think I've covered a lot of this. So I'm just, So is there a future generation that's going to be interested in the farm? We don't know. Here's current possibilities. And here's one of them learning to drive a tractor with her dad. So that ends my presentation.
Being that Stuart's done all the talking, maybe there's some questions to the sons, John or
Blair and John.
Yep.
Sure. So you mentioned the presentation about adopting non-farm How have you
Sorry.
Sure. Thank you. So you mentioned in the presentation trying to adopt non-agricultural or farming practices to succession of assets and whatnot. And one of my questions for you as a family is, how have you worked to prevent against the threat of entitlement and people feeling entitled to your wealth simply because they're related to you? Do you feel it as a threat to the long-term success of the business as a whole?
So you're saying one of my sons would look at it as they're entitled to it? Oh, okay, yeah, okay. I think the dynamic we've had in our family is that entitlement is not on the list. Entitlement is not. They're not looking for money out of the operation. There might, in other situations, you may not have that common understanding. I think often what we hear in farm succession general rules are fair but not equal. And so how do you establish fair but not equal? And that view, it's kind of like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. And at the end of the day, it's mom and dad that make that determination. Because I think they have to come to some agreement. And I've seen families ripped apart because of how that is determined. It isn't predetermined. One spouse dies. Everything transfers to the other spouse. One of the favorites gets special treatment, they think, and I could mention. Blair?
I think I would speak to that just in the rights. You kind of heard we truly were blessed that Dad allowed us to get involved in sports and everything, and so we've never had a culture, I believe, of an entitlement. But at the same time, because of that family history, we're managing family wealth, just like many of you are, generations of family wealth. And so to have the mentality of cashing the chips, you've destroyed that family wealth that the generations before you built. And that's important to us, that if somebody decides to step out of they've been like the prodigal son, they've taken their money and they've decided, are they going to invest that family wealth for their generations? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, in the eyes of, again, how they handle that, but they are managing the family wealth from the generations before them, and that's been affirmed in our discussion.
Incidentally, there's a family communication. There's an article that Richard Cressman, I think a fourth cousin, wrote in the Grain Farmer, January issue of the Grain Farmer. Good reading on soft skills.
So, Stuart, have you addressed the issue of prenups with these other 4 spouses?
We have not. We have not, and it might be an area we talk through. Nothing has, nothing has transferred as of yet, but it might be worthy of discussion, John. Not suggesting that we're counting on their marriages to fail. My dad could be quite blunt.
So, Stuart, if I understand it right, 4 sons, that's the children, you got no daughters?
Yeah.
So how you envision a transfer of this type would work if there was other children not involved? Like here, if you got all 4, I can kind of see, a lot of things happening, but...
Well, I think, Carl, that's the challenge that I think you're going to have to sort out, or others are going to have to sort out. I have enough challenge figuring out my situation and trying to work through it. And I think that the thing that I know, I've approached my accountant a number of times on this one, and he said, well, just force one of them to choose. And I saw that as a no-win situation, because I know they have careers that they love. They're invested a lot of time and sweat equity in it. And I was saying, isn't there a creative solution here that we can get a win-win? And I'm always one to look for win-wins. And anyhow, so I'll leave that. You got to solve your own. Sorry.
Please thank our speakers, and then...
Yes, Stuart and John and Blair Cressman. Thank you very much.